Okay, so as a follow-up to a couple of my previous examples, I wanted to try to help connect some of the dots as you approach the final project. So I'll start with some of the big ideas and to just really help clarify because I think the first time that you're doing model controller view type of type of a project, some things may not be immediately clear. And so what I was gonna say is generally speaking, when you see something like a controller, you can think of that as the back end where all the logic is. And so for our purposes, you can think of the controller as I think in the final project, it's something like display course info. Um, so you can rename the controller to display course info. And then what does that mean for us? The main won't really actually have a whole lot of anything. The role of the main is just going to be to load the fxml file, and the fxml file is going to link to the controller. And so I renamed my controller Garage Viewer for this example that I'm going to show you with some cars. And I renamed my sample package to CSC164, but that's the general architecture. And so our fxml file is going to have all the front end stuff, meaning all the stuff you see when you make the application. So in this case, all I have is just a list view on the left side and just a little text on the right side, all in an H box. So an H box is a horizontal layout. My list view has a name. It's just called menu. And my list view also has uh, a mouse clicked event that's going to call the list result. This is a little bit different than I did in the previous example. They both work. It kind of depends on how you want to do it. And my text is just called my text, I think. Yep, it's just called my text, and the original value is original text. But then again, as an example, you can see that it's easy enough to make that change. So my text, that's set text. Hey, I changed, but you can name that whatever you want. And none of that stuff is going to work until you inject the component correctly. And so you'll see that my list view item is there and my text item is there. So on to the interesting stuff. So the actual project, you're going to notice that there's an array list of students. And before I showed you how to do a list view with an array list of strings. So that's pretty easy because a string makes sense. It's just what you display on that little menu was just a, a string. But in this case, I made an array list of cars, which again you can use your imagination, but that could easily be a student instead. And inside that array list, I have a couple of car objects, and then my car class is fairly straightforward. There's a model and an MPG, and this is probably the most important part. I have a toString method. The toString method is what's going to work the magic so that when you set the list view to look at that array list, it knows that the toString is what it needs to display. And so this information over on the left column comes from the toString method. And so the next part I already addressed in the previous video, but this method is going to get called anytime the list view item is clicked on. So you'll see I'm getting a lot of red here. Why? Because if I'm clicking anywhere in this entire box, I'm actually clicking on the list view. But what I'm trying to display has to do with um, the actual selected item. So this means that I'm not selecting anything. So if I actually go ahead and I do click on something, you'll see that it does something much more interesting. So here we get issues, but here that dark blue means something is selected. And so we look over here, you'll see that this is the method that keeps getting called repeatedly anytime I click anywhere on here. And there should be just populate list. Every time I click on something valid, it just That's just a little debugging output that I did. Um, but this is another really, really important line for you to understand. So what happens when I call the get selection model get selected item method? That returns a car object. And so now I can use that car object, which I just stored as a temp car, to do whatever it is I want. You can use your imagination. You can mess with the MPGs or do whatever. But now I have a reference to that car. In this case, that would be a Civic. And so I'm using the Civic to set the text to the model of the Civic. I can change that to get MPG, or I can do anything I want in there. Um, and so yeah, hopefully this is helpful to sort of connect the dots at the end. But the list view component is really, really powerful, and you can. It doesn't just have to be strings. It can be objects of whatever. So this particular example has a car object, and the toString is going to be extremely important. Otherwise, this line is not going to be so happy. It's not going to know what to display.